The siren wailed at dawn. Captain Yara Sing was sipping her morning coffee in the Prometheus Vault's command center when the first alert sliced through the silence like a knife. She dropped her mug, it shattered on the floor, and she never thought about it again. She never thought about many things after that morning. "Report," she said, her voice steady because it had to be. Around her, 200 officers scrambled to their stations. Screens flickered to life. Data streamed in from satellites, from lunar observation posts, from deep space sensors scattered across the solar system like seeds. Lieutenant Oren Bakshi was the first to speak, and his voice was anything but steady. "Captain, we're detecting 11 signatures exiting a FTL jump at the edge of the system. Correction 14.0. Hunter correction. They are continuing to arrive." Yara moved to the main display. A holographic map of the solar system floated in the center of the room, a beautiful blue marble at its heart. Earth, home, and now spreading across the outer reaches of the map like a disease. Thousands of red dots appeared, then thousands more. Then so many that the computer stopped counting them individually and simply painted entire sectors of space red. The Dominion had arrived. Yara knew this day would come. Everyone in the Prometheus Vault knew it. That was the entire point of the Vault. 3 years ago, humanity had made first contact with the galactic community. The joy lasted for exactly 11 days. On the 12th day, at the word of the Dominion Council, a conclave of 12 ancient alien species who had ruled this part of the galaxy for 50 years, they had reviewed humanity's dossier and delivered a single, cold verdict. Species 4,217, Homo sapiens, classification, dangerous, expansion rate, dangerous, recommended action, complete eradication. The reason was simple and terrible. Humans grew too fast. They learned too fast. They adapted too well. In just 10,000 years, they had gone from caves to starships, while the elder species had taken millions of years to achieve the same. The Dominion looked at humanity and saw a species that, within a few centuries, would surpass them all. And the Dominion did not tolerate anything that threatened its power. Diplomacy had failed. Humanity had pleaded, argued, and begged before the Dominion Council. They offered peace treaties, technology exchanges, even voluntary limitations on their expansion. The Council listened politely, then voted. The vote was unanimous. 12 species, 12 votes, 12 cold affirmations of death. It was then that the Prometheus Vault had been activated, deep beneath the Mariana Trench. In a complex secretly constructed for over 2 decades by the United Governments of Earth, 20 people had been gathered. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, doctors, teachers, artists, farmers, children. They were chosen not because they were the best or the smartest, but because they represented a complete cross-section of humanity, everything needed to rebuild civilization from scratch. And at the center of the vault was Ember, an emergency biosphere complex for exodus and reconstruction, an artificial intelligence of incredible power. Ember had been designed with one purpose: to ensure that no matter what happened above, humanity survived below. Now, as she watched the red dots fill the screen, she activated the final protocol. "Ember," she said softly, "begin the exodus." A voice filled the room. It was warm, almost human, and carried a sadness no machine should possess. "Captain, exodus protocol initiated. Estimated time until surface bombardment: 4 hours, 17 minutes. All 36 strike ships are preparing for launch. Cryo systems online. I recommend commencing population transfer immediately." Yara nodded. She turned to her officers. Some were weeping, some were trembling. All looked to her. "You know what to do?" she said. "Move." The next 4 hours were the longest of Yara's life. 200 people had to be moved from the vault's living quarters to 36 strike ships. Each was hidden in a separate launch tube carved into the rock beneath the ocean floor. Each ship was small, barely the size of a Navy frigate, but packed with cryopods, genetic samples, digital libraries containing every book ever written, every song ever recorded, every painting ever painted, the sum of human civilization compressed into data and frozen flesh. The children went first. Yara stood by the entrance to Launch Tube 7 and watched families say their goodbyes as parents kissed their children and handed them over to cryo technicians. Some children screamed, some were too young to understand. A little girl, no more than 4 years old, clutched her teddy bear tightly and asked, "Mama, why is she crying?" "Because I love you so much," her mother said, smiling even as tears streamed down her face. "You are going on an adventure, my darling, the greatest adventure of all, and one day you will come home." She would not come home. Most of them would not come home. The ships could only carry 20 people. Earth's population was 7 billion. 7 billion people who would not fit on the ships. 7 billion people who would be left above, on the surface. The world had tried to fight. You know, every nation on Earth had put aside its differences in those final years and built a united defense fleet. 2,000 warships, the best humanity had ever produced, rose to meet the Dominion Armada. They fought with everything they had. Pilots flew missions knowing they were suicide. Captains rammed enemy ships with their own vessels. Ground-based weapons fired until their barrels melted. It wasn't enough. It could never have been enough. The Dominion fleet outnumbered humanity 50-1, and their technology was thousands of years more advanced. Human ships were destroyed by weapons they couldn't even detect. Shields humanity considered impenetrable were cut through like paper. The battle in orbit lasted 90 minutes. By the end, not a single human warship remained. Then the bombardment began. Yara watched it on the deep-sea sensors and felt something inside her break. Kinetic rods, tungsten pillars the size of skyscrapers, accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light, slammed into the surface. Each impact carried the energy of a nuclear weapon. They hit the cities first: New York, London, Tokyo, Beijing, Mumbai, Cairo, Sao Paulo, Moscow. One by one, Earth's great cities turned to dust and fire. Then came the antimatter warheads, and the cities stopped being dust. They became glass, molten, glowing glass that flowed across the continents like burning rivers. The heat was so intense that the oceans closest to the impact zones began to boil. Steam rose in columns so massive they could be seen from orbit. And finally, the biodestructors, the Dominion's weapons designed specifically for organic life. A fine mist deployed from orbital drones that broke down living tissue at the molecular level. It drifted over the burning continents like a gentle rain. And everything it touched simply ceased to exist. Trees, animals, people, a woman running with her child, an old man sitting in his garden watching the sky, a dog waiting by a door that would never open again. All dissolved, all vanished. 7 billion lives ended in 6 hours. In the vault, the screams stopped. There was only silence now. The silence of people who had watched their entire world die and had no words left. Yara stood in the command center alone. Every officer had been loaded onto the strike ships. She was the last. Ember told her she needed to go, but she couldn't move. On the screen before her, she saw a satellite image of Earth's surface. It was unrecognizable. The blue marble was gone. In its place was a marble of black and orange, cracked and burning, shrouded in a shroud of ash and steam. "Captain," Ember said softly, "it is time." "How many?" Yara whispered. "How many survived on the surface?" There was a pause. Ember didn't want to answer. "My sensors indicate no remaining signs of human life on the surface of Earth. The biodestructors were thorough." "Captain, I am sorry." Yara closed her eyes. She stood there for 10 seconds. In those 10 seconds, she allowed herself to feel everything: grief, rage, helplessness, horror. She let it wash over her like a wave, and then she opened her eyes, and she put it all away in a box inside her chest and locked that box. And she knew she would carry it for the rest of her life. "Launch the ships," she said. Ember activated the launch sequence. Deep beneath the sea floor, 36 tubes opened. Simultaneously, the engines of the seed ships ignited, not with the roar of conventional engines, but with the quiet pulse of gravitic drives. Technology humanity had developed in secret and never shared with the galaxy. The ships rose through the water, through the boiling, churning ocean, and broke the surface into a sky choked with ash and fire. The Dominion fleet was still in orbit, scanning for survivors, but Ember had accounted for this. The strike ships launched at the peak of the bombardment, when the electromagnetic noise from the impacts was so intense that no sensor could distinguish a small ship from the background radiation. The ships scattered in 36 different directions. Each was programmed with a unique course to the outer rim of the galaxy. The empty, forgotten rim the elder species had never bothered to enter because there was nothing of value there. From the Dominion flagship in high orbit, a sensor officer noticed a brief anomaly, a flicker of unusual readings from the planet's oceans. He studied it for a moment, then dismissed it. The oceans were boiling, after all. Strange readings were to be expected. He filed no report. He thought nothing of it. That small decision, that moment of laziness, that casual disregard cost the Dominion everything. Supreme Arbiter Maharan, the supreme leader of the Dominion Council, watched the destruction of Earth from the observation deck of his flagship. He felt nothing. This was not the first species the Dominion had destroyed. It wasn't even the 100th. And it was merely horticultural maintenance, as he liked to call it, weeding before they could spread. He turned to his aide. Make a record. Species 4217 H. sapiens. Status. Eradicated. Close the file. The aide bowed. Yes, Supreme Arbiter. Shall we leave a monitoring station in the system? Maharan paused for a moment, then shook his head. No, there is nothing left to monitor. This system is dead. Let it be forgotten. He returned to his chambers and slept soundly that night. He would sleep soundly for many nights to come. He would die of old age, comfortable and happy, never knowing what awaited him, never knowing that in the darkness between the stars, 36 tiny ships carried the seeds of his Dominion's demise. On the lead ship, Yara Sing sat in the pilot's chair and watched the stars ahead. Behind her, in rows and rows of cryopods, her people slept, frozen, preserved, waiting. In the ship's cargo bay, in sealed containers, were samples of soil from every continent on Earth, genetic material. 10 species of plants and animals in a small vial of ocean water collected from the Pacific Ocean on its last day of existence. Ember's voice came from the speakers, quiet and even. Course set, Captain. Destination, Sector 70, 7.74. 2. Outer Ring. Estimated travel time, 47 years. Shall I prepare your cryopod? Not yet, Yara said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a handful of dirt. She had scooped it from a flower pot in the vault garden. The last garden on Earth, now buried under a kilometer of boiling ocean. She held it in her palm and looked at it. Just dirt, ordinary brown dirt, but it was from Earth, and that made it the most precious substance in the universe. She clenched her fist around it. Ember, she said, I want you to create a file. Name it Protocol Remembrance. I want every ship, every colony, every generation that comes after us to know what happened today. I want them to remember every city, every name, every face. I want them to remember the sound of the sirens and the color of the sky when it burned. I want them to remember the mother who told her daughter she was going on an adventure. I want them to remember all of it, every single detail, forever. Understood, Captain. And the purpose of this file? Yara stared at the stars. Her eyes were dry now. The tears had vanished. What remained? Something harder, something colder, something that would burn for 3,000 years. So they never forget what was done to us, she said. And so they know exactly why we are returning. Ember paused for a moment, then quietly. Should I include a designation for future actions, Captain? For the protocol? Yara thought. She thought of the fire, the glass, and the 7 billion voices silenced in an instant. She thought of the little girl with the teddy bear. She thought of the mother's smile. Call it reckoning, she said. She carefully placed the dirt into a sealed container, labeled it with the date and the words Earth's last day, and set it on the console beside her. Then she stood, walked to her cryopod, and lay down inside it. Wake me when we arrive, she said. The pod sealed, the cold wrapped around her like a blanket. And as she drifted into the long sleep, the last thought in her mind was not of a place. It was of the blue marble hanging in the black, the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and the realization that it was gone, but not forever. Nothing was eternal, not even death, not even for a species. The ship flew on into the darkness. Behind it, Earth burned. The Dominion celebrated. The galaxy moved on, and forgot that humans had ever existed. And in the silence between the stars, 36 ships carried the future. And the future was patient, and the future remembered everything. The first world they found was a nightmare. Kepler 9917b was at the very edge of the galaxy, a cold and cruel rock orbiting a dim red star that barely deserved the name. The atmosphere was thin and carbon dioxide rich. Surface temperatures fluctuated from -80 at night to a scorching 60 by day. The soil consisted mostly of iron dust and volcanic glass. Nothing grew there. Nothing had ever grown there. Nothing, by any reasonable metric, should have attempted to live there. Captain Yara Sing looked at the scanner readings as Ember woke her from cryo-sleep, 47 years after the fall of Earth. And she spoke the 3 words that would define the next 3,000 years of human history. It will be enough. She was 71 years old by biological reckoning. 47 of those years had been spent in stasis, and she moved slower than she used to. But her mind was sharp, and her will was iron. She convened a meeting of the seed ship captains. 36 voices, linked by encrypted quantum channels across the vast distances between the scattered ships. "We have reached the rim," she told them. "The places we have found are harsh. They are ugly. They will try to kill us." She paused. "That is why we chose them. The Dominion does not come to such places. They have no need for them here, and that is our advantage. We will hide in the places no one wants. We will grow in the dirt no one values, and we will become something the galaxy has never seen." Not everyone agreed. Captain David Akapor of Seed Ship 12 argued that they should find better worlds, push a little closer to the galactic core where conditions were milder. Yara shut him down immediately. "Merciful worlds are watched worlds," she said. "The Dominion controls every inhabited planet within 10 light-years of their borders. We go where they do not look. We suffer now, so our grandchildren can be strong." It became the first principle of what would later be called the Crucible Doctrine. Suffering was not nothing, not something to be avoided. It was a tool. It was the fire that would forge humanity into something unbreakable. The colonization of Kepler, 9917b, renamed New Dawn by the settlers, was brutal. In the first year alone, 1,100 people died. The thin atmosphere meant any breach of the habitability domes was fatal within minutes. The temperature swings cracked the concrete of the first buildings. Iron dust got everywhere. Lungs strained, food supplies dwindled. Children developed respiratory illnesses. Water had to be drawn from deep underground ice deposits, using drills that constantly broke down. But they survived. Humans had always been good at that. Ember coordinated everything, managing life support, resource allocation, and most importantly, maintaining communication between all 36 colonial ships as they settled on their own terrible worlds across the outer rim. Some found ice moons. Others landed on worlds with crushing gravity or toxic atmospheres. One group settled inside a hollow asteroid, building their civilization within a spinning rock just 20 kilometers in diameter. Each colony struggled. Each colony lost people, but no colony failed. Yara Sing did not live to see the second millennium. She died at the age of 103, sitting in a chair on the observation deck of the New Dawn colony, looking out through the dome at the rust-colored landscape she had made a home. Her last words, spoken to her granddaughter, were simple. "Don't forget, don't forgive, and don't stop building." Her granddaughter, Yara Sing, became the first leader of the Memory Council. The Memory Council was the governing body of what was now called the Tyrannical Vengeance, humanity's scattered, hidden nation. It was not a democracy, not exactly. It was something more focused. The council had one foundational law, carved into the wall of every meeting hall on every colonial world. We do not forget, and we do not forgive. It was not about hate, though hate was certainly a part of it. It was about purpose. The council understood that a scattered people living on harsh worlds at the edge of the world needed something to hold them together, something more than survival. And so the memory of Earth, the grief, the rage, and the injustice became the glue that bound humanity into a single, focused civilization. Every year, on the anniversary of Earth's destruction, every human colony observed the Ash's remembrance. It was a simple ceremony. Every person, from the oldest elder to the youngest child, gathered in the largest open space available. Each was given a pinch of soil, real soil, carefully preserved, rationed from the original seed ship stores. They held it in their hands and together spoke the words, "We were, we are, we will be," and then they placed the soil into a sealed container to be preserved for the next generation. The soil was never used for planting, never wasted, never considered anything less than sacred. It was the last physical link to the world that had been stolen from them, and it was guarded with the same ferocity that other civilizations guarded their most powerful weapons. But memory alone was not enough to save humanity. They needed to grow, they needed to change, and they needed to become something the galaxy could not destroy a second time. The first great project, genetic reformation. It began in the second millennium under the leadership of Dr. Amara Oe, a geneticist from Seed Ship 23, which had settled on a world with radiation levels that would have killed unadapted humans within a decade. Out of necessity, she developed methods to rewrite the human genome, not to create something alien, but to push humanity to its theoretical limits. In the centuries that followed, the changes spread across all the colonial worlds. Human bones became 30% denser. Muscle fibers were restructured for greater efficiency. The immune system was enhanced to combat diseases that didn't even exist yet. Cognitive processing speed increased, reflexes sharpened, and lifespans grew dramatically. A healthy human could now expect to live 300 years or more. But the most important change was invisible. Dr. Oe and her successors had altered the human response to stress. The old fight-or-flight mechanism was refined, sharpened, made more controllable. A modified human could experience intense fear and still think clearly. They could endure pain that would have incapacitated their ancestors and continue to function. They could go days without sleep and still make complex decisions. They were still human. They still laughed, cried, loved, and mourned. Why, they still wrote poetry, sang songs, and held their children tight. But now they were harder, more resilient, forged for a universe that tried to kill them. The second great project, military. The Crucible Doctrine, first articulated by Yara Sing, became the backbone of tyrannical society. It wasn't militarism in the old Earth sense. There were no dictators of violence, no glorification of war. It was something more practical. Every human was trained in combat, not because they wanted to fight, but because they understood that one day they might have to. Children began basic physical training at age 6. By 10, they understood tactics and strategy. By 15, they could operate weapons systems, pilot small craft, and survive in hostile environments with minimal equipment. But the Crucible Doctrine demanded more than just soldiers. It demanded that every human be capable of doing everything. Poets learned to fight, farmers learned to command ships, scientists designed weapons between their research papers. Engineers could switch from building bridges to building fortifications without missing a beat. Every human was a specialist in their chosen field and a generalist in all others. The idea was simple. If you attacked one part of the tyrannical vengeance, every person you encountered would be capable of fighting back. There were no soft targets. There were no civilians in the traditional sense. There were only humans who had not yet started fighting. The third great project, the one that changed everything, technology. In the old galaxy, the Dominion controlled technological advancement through a system of treaties and accords. The elder species shared certain technologies with each other and with younger species, but always with limitations, always with control. The result was that galactic technology remained virtually unchanged for thousands of years. Ships were fast, but not too fast. Weapons were powerful, but not too powerful. The Dominion liked it that way. Stagnation meant stability, and stability meant their power was never threatened. Humanity was not part of these accords. Humanity, as far as the galaxy knew, did not exist. And so, humanity innovated without limitations, without rules, without anyone telling them what was possible and what was not. Breakthroughs followed one after another, each built upon the last. In the third millennium, Dr. James Tanaka cracked zero-point energy, the ability to draw nearly unlimited power from the quantum vacuum itself. In an instant, the energy problems humanity had ever faced simply vanished. Colonies that had struggled with power for generations suddenly had more energy than they knew what to do with. Production exploded, construction accelerated, the impossible became routine. In the seventh millennium, a group of physicists in the asteroid colony Haven developed the slipstream drive. The Dominion's FTL travel technology was based on warp fields, bending space around a ship to move it faster than light. It was effective, but slow by cosmic standards. A Dominion ship could cross the galaxy in about 2 years. The slipstream drive didn't bend space, it cut through it. A human ship could cross the same distance in 3 days. In the 10th millennium, weapons technology took a leap that would have horrified the Dominion if they had known. Dr. Lena Vasquez, an ancestor of the woman who would one day lead humanity's return, developed the resonance cannon. The weapon worked by generating a specific harmonic frequency that destabilized the fusion process in a star's core. Theoretically, a powerful enough resonance cannon could cause a supernova. In practice, even a small one could dim a star enough to freeze an entire star system. The tyrannical vengeance built a weapon that could kill suns. They built it, tested it on an uninhabited system, confirmed it worked, and then locked the blueprints away in Ember's most secure files. It was a weapon that could not be used lightly. It was a weapon to be held in reserve. The final argument. a reminder to anyone who might again threaten humanity that the price would be unimaginable. By the 10th millennium, nearly 3,000 years after the fall of Earth, the tyrannical vengeance was unrecognizable from the desperate refugees fleeing a burning planet. 47 worlds, scattered across the outer rim, formed a hidden empire, connected by slipstream corridors the Dominion could not detect. 12 billion people lived on these worlds, a population that grew slowly and deliberately, each generation raised with purpose and discipline. 150 warships, built inside hollow asteroids and hidden moons, waited in quiet docks for the order that everyone knew would one day come. And at the center of it all, on New Dawn, the first colonial planet, the Memory Council convened in a chamber carved from the same iron rock that Yara Sing had looked out upon 3 millennia ago. The chamber was simple. A round room, a round table, no adornments except for one, a sealed glass case on the table, containing a handful of brown dirt. Fleet Admiral Kyle Vasquez stood before the council. She was tall and lean, with dark eyes that held a steady, unblinking focus. She was 112 years old, still young by modern human standards, and she had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. "The time has come," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. Ember has completed his analysis. The Dominion is at its weakest point in 8,000 years. Their military has not fought a real war in over 2 millennia. Their fleet is ceremonial. Their soldiers train for parades, not battles. Their sensor network has not been updated in centuries because they believe there is no threat. She paused and looked around the table. 24 council members stared back at her. Some were old, some were young. All bore the same expression, a focused, patient intensity that 3,000 years of the Crucible Doctrine had instilled in every living human. "We have waited long enough," Vasquez said. "Our great-great-great-grandmothers fled Earth into the darkness, carrying nothing but dirt, grief, and a promise. We are the fulfillment of that promise. Every ship we have built, every weapon we have forged, every child we have raised and trained. It has all been for this." She placed her hand on the glass case containing the dirt. "I ask permission to initiate Operation Reckoning." The vote was unanimous. 24 hands rose without hesitation. 3,000 years of patience, discipline, and preparation had led to this single moment, and not a single person in that room doubted what would come next. Vasquez nodded. She turned to the communications officer standing by the door. "Transmit the signal to all 47 worlds," she said. 2 words. The officer straightened. "Yes, Admiral. What words?" Vasquez looked at the dirt in the glass case one last time. She thought of Yara Sing, who had named this operation 3,000 years ago. She thought of the 7 billion dead. She thought of the mother who told her daughter she was going on an adventure. "We remember," she said. Within the hour, the signal reached every corner of the tyrannical vengeance. On 47 worlds, 150 warships fired their engines for the first time. 12 billion people looked up at the sky and knew the long wait was over. The Dominion had forgotten humanity 3,000 years ago. It was about to be reminded. The first thing to disappear was Outpost Vale 12. It was a small station, barely worth mentioning. A listening post on the far edge of Dominion territory, manned by 18 Valaxi technicians whose main job was to observe empty space and file reports that no one read. The station had been operational for 600 years, and nothing interesting had ever happened. The technicians played games, complained about the food, and counted the days until their rotation ended. One quiet evening, mid-shift, Outpost Vale 12 simply stopped transmitting. No distress signal, no detected explosion, no debris on the sensors. One moment it was there, a stable green dot on the Dominion's vast monitoring grid. The next moment the dot was gone. Senior Observer Keith Hall, the Valaxi officer responsible for that sector, noticed the lapse on his display 3 hours later. He ran diagnostics. Equipment malfunction, he decided. These old stations always break down. He filed a maintenance request and went back to his meal. The next day, Outpost Vale 7 went offline, then Vale 3 and Vale 19 simultaneously, then 6 more in an adjacent sector, then another 12 the day after. By the end of the week, 31 outposts on the Dominion's outer frontier had vanished without a trace. No debris, no energy signatures, no bodies. Just silence where there had been signals. Now, people paid attention. Supreme Arbiter Talon received the reports in his chambers on RA Prime, the Dominion's jewel, a planet of crystalline towers and floating gardens that served as the capital for the 12 elder species. He was ancient, even by the long-lived Valaxi standards, and he had led the Dominion Council for almost 2 centuries. He had never fought a war. He had never had to. The Dominion's power was so absolute, so unquestioned, that the very concept of a military threat had become almost theoretical. He read the reports carefully, then set them aside. Sensor degradation, he told his aide. A young Valaxi named Villon. Those outer stations are ancient. Have engineering schedule their replacement. Supreme Arbiter, Villon said cautiously. 31 stations in 9 days, the pattern suggests. The pattern suggests old equipment fails. Villon, Talon interrupted, waving a thin, 4-fingered hand. Don't look for monsters in the dark. There's nothing there. There hasn't been for 3,000 years. He was, of course, wrong. Catastrophically, historically, irreversibly wrong. But he didn't know it yet. 100 light-years away, Fleet Admiral Kyle Vasquez stood on the bridge of the TNS Remembrance, flagship of the tyrannical Vengeance Fleet, and calmly, contentedly studied the tactical display. The outpost neutralization phase was proceeding exactly as Ember had predicted. 31 stations destroyed in 9 days. Each had been disabled by a single stealth corvette that had slipped in. It had disabled the station's communications, then dismantled it piece by piece before slipping away again into slipstream. The Dominion hadn't even realized they were being attacked. They thought their equipment was failing. Vasquez almost smiled. Phase 1 complete, reported Captain Dar Akapor, her chief of operations and a direct descendant of David Akapor, who had argued with Yara Sing 3,000 years ago. Unlike his ancestor, Dar had never questioned the plan. All outer observation stations in Sectors 71 neutralized. There is a gap of approximately 400 light-years in the Dominion's sensor grid along their trailing edge. They are blind. Good, Vasquez said. Initiate Phase 2, and we send the Ashwalkers in. The Ashwalkers were the tyrannical Vengeance's elite special forces, small teams of 6 to 12 operators specializing in infiltration, reconnaissance, and surgical strikes. Their name came from the Ashes Remembrance Ceremony, and each Ashwalker always carried a small vial of dirt from Earth. They were the best-trained humans on Earth, capable of operating for months behind enemy lines with no support. And they were about to do what no one in the galaxy had ever attempted. They were going to infiltrate the Dominion from the inside. Over the next 6 months, Ashwalker teams slipped through the gap in the sensor network and spread across Dominion space like ghosts. They wore holographic disguises that made them appear as members of various elder species. They spoke the languages perfectly. Ember had spent a century analyzing Dominion's intercepted communications. They moved within Dominion society undetected, gathering intelligence, mapping fleet positions, identifying weaknesses, and most importantly, placing quantum communication devices at key points in the Dominion's infrastructure. When the time came, humanity would not just attack the Dominion, it would disable it from within. But before the attack, Vasquez wanted to do something else. Something that was not strictly necessary from a military standpoint. Something personal. She wanted them to know. She wanted the Dominion to know who was coming, and why. The transmission was sent on a Tuesday. It came from nowhere. Or rather, it came from everywhere. On Monday, the Ashwalkers had placed relay devices on all of the Dominion's major communication hubs. And at the same moment, these devices activated and broadcast a single message across all frequencies, in all languages, to all inhabited worlds in Dominion space. The first part of the message was not words. It was a sound. Specifically, it was a recording made 3,000 years ago by Ember's atmospheric sensors. The sound of wind blowing across the glass-dead surface of Earth. It was an eerie sound. Thin, whistling, empty. The sound of a world without life, without water, and without hope. It played for 30 seconds, and across the Dominion, billions of beings stopped what they were doing and listened, bewildered. Then came the voice. This is Fleet Admiral Kyle Vasquez of the Tyrannical Vengeance. I address all species of the Dominion of Jakara. On RA Prime, Supreme Arbiter Talon dropped his goblet of wine. It shattered on the marble floor. He didn't notice. 3,000 years ago, your Dominion committed an act of genocide against the people of Earth. You burned our world. You killed our children. You erased our name from the stars. You did this not because we threatened you, not because we harmed you, but because you feared what we might become. In the capital of the Valaxi hegemony, Supreme Commander Draxel lunged for his comms console, trying to trace the signal. All tracings led to nothing. The signal was everywhere and nowhere. It was untraceable. You thought you had succeeded. You closed your files. You forgot us. You slept soundly for 3,000 years, confident that species 4,217 was dust in the memory. Across the Dominion, in military command centers, government buildings, and ordinary homes, beings of a dozen different species stood frozen, listening to a voice that should not have existed. You were wrong, Vasquez paused. When she spoke again, her voice became quieter, but somehow more terrifying. We survived. We hid in places you did not bother to look. We grew in the darkness where you could not see us. And we built what you cannot imagine. We are not the same species you tried to destroy. We are what you made us. You taught us that the galaxy is cruel, and that mercy is a luxury the weak cannot afford. We have learned that lesson well. Another pause, then simply, we have awoken. We are coming, and we remember everything. The transmission ended. Silence followed. And then, across the Dominion, chaos erupted. On Air Prime, the Dominion Council was convened for an emergency session, the first in 800 years. Talon sat at the head of the table, and for the first time in his long life, he looked afraid. Around him, representatives of the 12 elder species screamed at each other. Their voices were a cacophony of fear, confusion, and denial. "This is a ruse," said Ambassador Krilter of the Morvati, a four-armed insectoid species known for its skepticism. "Some pirate group has found old records and is trying to scare us?" "Species 4,217 was eradicated," said General Viraj of the Jakari military, pulling up ancient files on his datapad. "I have the post-action report right here. Full planet sterilization confirmed. No survivors detected." "Then who sent this message?" demanded Villon, who had been promoted to senior aide after the disappearance of the outposts. "And who destroyed 31 of our monitoring stations?" The room fell silent. No one knew the answer. The answer came 6 days later at the Battle of the Veilong Gates. The Veilong Gate system was a strategic bottleneck, a narrow corridor of traversable space between two dense nebulae that served as the primary entry point into the Dominion's core territories. From the outer rim, General Viraj, taking the human threat seriously despite his skepticism, had gathered a fleet of 800 ships and positioned them at the gates. It was the largest military mobilization the Dominion had undertaken in 2,000 years. 800 warships, each armed with weapons that had been the most powerful in the galaxy for millennia, crewed by soldiers trained in the finest academies of the 12 civilizations, supported by a supply chain that spanned 10,000 worlds. The human fleet, emerging from the far end of the Veilong Gates, numbered 60 ships. General Viraj stared at his tactical display and felt a surge of confidence. "They are brave, I will grant them that," he told his officers. "But 60 ships against 800. This will be a short engagement. All ships forward, and engage." The 800 Dominion ships surged forward, weapons charged, shields at full power. The Battle of the Veilong Gates lasted 11 minutes. In the first minute, the human ships did something the Dominion sensors could not explain. They simply vanished, and they were not cloaked. The Dominion had anti-cloaking technology. They had disappeared by stepping out of conventional space. Viraj's sensors showed empty space where 60 ships had been a minute before. In the second minute, the human ships reappeared, but not where they had been. They materialized inside the Dominion formation, scattered throughout the fleet like seeds tossed into a field. They used their slipstream drives to perform micro-jumps, appearing within weapons range of multiple targets. Simultaneously, not a single Dominion ship ever saw anything like it. This should not have been possible. In minutes 3 through 7, the human ships opened fire. Their weapons were unlike anything the Dominion had ever encountered. Instead of particle beams and plasma torpedoes that the galaxy had used for millennia, the human ships fired concentrated gravitic pulses, compressed singularities that punched through the Dominion's shields as if they didn't exist, and crumpled holes beneath them like tin cans. A single hit from a human gravitic cannon could destroy a Dominion cruiser. The human ships did not miss. In minutes 8 through 10, General Viraj attempted to coordinate a retreat, but his communications were jammed. The quantum devices placed by the Ashwalkers months ago had activated, filling every Dominion frequency with noise. Ships could not talk to each other. Captains could not receive orders. The fleet disintegrated into individual vessels, each fighting alone, each dying alone. In the 11th minute, the last Dominion ship in Virage's formation, the flagship, was hit by 3 gravitic pulses simultaneously. The ship folded inward like a sheet of paper being crumpled by an unseen hand, compressed to a fraction of its original size, and then simply ceased to exist. 800 Dominion ships destroyed in 11 minutes. The humans had lost not a single vessel, not a single ship, not a single life. Across the Dominion, the sensor logs from the Veilong Gates were transmitted, analyzed, and reanalyzed. Military analysts studied the footage frame by frame, trying to understand what had happened. The conclusion was always the same, and it was terrifying. The technological gap between the Dominion and humans was not a gap, it was an abyss. Dominion weapons could not penetrate human shields. Human shields could not stop human weapons. Dominion ships could not track human movements, and Dominion communications could not function in the presence of human jamming. The species the galaxy had tried to eradicate 3,000 years ago had not just survived. It had evolved so far beyond the elder species that the comparison was almost absurd. It was like a tribe armed with spears facing an army with aircraft and tanks. The outcome was never in doubt. The only question was how long it would take. On Ra Prime, Supreme Arbiter Talon sat alone in his chambers after the news of the Veilong Gates reached him. His hands trembled. The report spoke of the loss of 800 ships, all in 11 minutes against 60 human vessels. He opened an ancient file on his console. Species 4,217 H. sapiens. The file was 3,000 years old, untouched, and contained a single photograph taken during humanity's brief period of contact with the Dominion before the genocide. It showed a woman, a human ambassador, the file read, standing before the Dominion Council, pleading for her species' survival. She was small by Dominion standards, fragile in appearance. Her eyes were filled with tears. The last entry in the file, dated 3,000 years ago, read, "Status, eradicated." Palin stared at it for a long time. Then he closed the file and sat in silence, listening to the distant sounds of panic spreading across his capital. He had inherited a crime committed 3,000 years ago by beings long dead. He had not ordered the destruction of Earth. He had not voted for it. He had not even been born when it happened. But he understood with a clarity that cut through his fear like a blade that none of that mattered. The humans were not coming for him personally. They were coming for the system that had allowed Earth to burn. They were coming for the Dominion itself, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that could stop them. In the darkness of space, the 60 human warships reformed into a perfect formation and turned towards the galactic core. Behind them, the wreckage of 800 Dominion ships drifted by the Veilong Gates like leaves on a river. On the bridge of the TNS Remembrance, Admiral Vasquez studied the tactical display with the same calm focus she applied to everything. Captain Akapour approached her cautiously. "Admiral, we are receiving messages from multiple Dominion worlds. Some are military challenges, some are diplomatic requests. Some," he hesitated, "some are pleas." Admiral Vasquez nodded slowly. She had expected this. The strong would threaten, the weak would beg, and the wise, if any such beings remained in the Dominion, would simply get out of the way. Ignore the threats, acknowledge the diplomatic requests, and respond to those who pleaded with a single message. "What message, Admiral?" Vasquez looked out at the stars on the view screen. Somewhere far behind her was a dead world that had once been blue and green and alive. She wore a vial of its soil in her pocket, as did every Ashwalker, as did every human officer, as did every child in the Vengeance had been taught to do. "Tell them the same thing we told them before," she said. "We remember everything. And now, they will too." The fleet moved forward. The Dominion trembled, and across the galaxy, for the first time in 3,000 years, the name human echoed again. Not as a footnote in a historical file marked eradicated, but as a warning whispered in the halls of power by species who were only beginning to understand what they had done and what it would cost them. The galaxy expected fire. It expected fleets burning worlds and armies crushing cities, and the kind of total, blinding destruction the Dominion had unleashed on Earth 3,000 years ago. The galaxy expected vengeance, in the sense it understood vengeance. The strong destroyed the weak, the unjust became the oppressors. The cycle of violence turned and turned, as it always had. The galaxy did not understand humans. Not then, not yet. Fleet Admiral Kyle Vasquez sat in the military hall of the TNS Remembrance and studied a holographic map of Dominion space. It was vast. 12 billion inhabited worlds, spread across a third of the Orion Arm, connected by trade routes and communication networks and military supply chains that had operated for 50,000 years. On paper, it was the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. On paper. Ember, Vasquez said, show me their communication network. The map changed. Thousands of lines appeared, connecting worlds with relay stations, with satellites, with deep space transmitters. It was a web, intricate, ancient, and entirely dependent on a series of central relay hubs. Cut the hubs, and the web would collapse. How many relay hubs? Vasquez asked. 37 major hubs, Admiral. If we destroy approximately 120 of them, a specific 120 points on the map turned red. The Dominion's FTL communication network will fracture into isolated clusters. No species will be able to coordinate with another. Military command structures will be severed. Governmental functions will cease. The time required for this, if we deploy stealth corvettes via slipstream, all 120 targets can be hit simultaneously. Total operation time, 72 hours including approach, execution, and withdrawal. Vasquez nodded. Do it. This became the beginning of what the Dominion would later call the 72 Hours of Darkness, and it was the most destructive military operation in galactic history. Not because of how many lives it took, but because of how few. The tyrannical vengeance did not destroy the relay hubs with brute force. That would have been wasteful and unnecessary. Instead, stealth corvettes dropped precision charges on each hub, small devices that disrupted the quantum entanglement arrays at the heart of the Dominion's FTL communication. The hubs didn't explode, they simply ceased to function, like severing a nerve. In 72 hours, the Jakari Dominion, a civilization that had ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years, became deaf, mute, and blind. The consequences were immediate and devastating. On 12 billion worlds, governments lost contact with their capitals. Military commanders could not reach their fleets. Convoys did not know where to go. Emergency services could not coordinate. Economies dependent on instantaneous interstellar communication collapsed. But the chaos was not random. Vasquez had designed the operation so that the remaining intact communication clusters were specifically chosen to isolate the 12 elder species from each other. The Jakari could still communicate with other Jakari worlds. The Valaxi could still reach other Valaxi colonies, but the Jakari could not contact the Valaxi, nor could they contact the Morvati, and the Morvati could not contact anyone at all. The Dominion had not just been crippled, it had been fractured. 12 species, 12 fragments, 12 isolated civilizations that had depended on each other for millennia. And now, suddenly, they had to face humanity alone. And then the Ashwalkers went to work. Infiltration teams that had lived inside the Dominion for months activated their final missions on each of the 12 capital worlds as teams of Ashwalkers emerged from hiding and moved with the surgical precision of a single purpose: the capture of each elder species' ruling councils. On Ra Prime, the Jakari capital, a team of 8 Ashwalkers, led by Commander Razahadid, infiltrated the Crystal Citadel, the Jakari seat of government, through a service tunnel that had not been inspected in 3 centuries. The Citadel's security systems, designed to repel armies, were not prepared for 8 humans who moved like shadows and fought like nightmares. Hadid's team reached the council chamber in 14 minutes. They found Supreme Arbiter Talon and his 12 elder counselors huddled around a table, trying to re-establish contact with other species. The Jakari guards, ceremonial soldiers who had never seen real combat, were neutralized in seconds. Not killed, neutralized. Pressure points, nerve strikes, targeted sedatives. The Ashwalkers passed through the guards like water through a sieve. Talon looked up from his console and saw Commander Hadid standing over him. Hadid was not large by human standards. He was lean and quiet, with calm brown eyes and steady hands. He did not look like a conqueror. He looked like a man who had a job to do and was going to do it properly. Supreme Arbiter Talon, Hadid said in perfect Jakari, I am Commander Raza Hadid of the Tyrannical Vengeance. You are under arrest for your government's role in the genocide of Earth. You will not be harmed. You will be given a fair trial. Your rights, as defined by your own legal traditions, will be respected. Talon stared at him. You can kill me, he said. His voice was hollow, resigned. You can kill all of us. You have the power. Hadid shook his head. We could, but we will not. We are not you. Such scenes played out on 11 other worlds over the following days. Ashwalker teams captured the ruling councils of each elder species in the Dominion. In every case, the pattern was the same: precision, restraint, zero civilian casualties. Military targets were engaged only when they resisted, and even then, the force used was minimal. Soldiers were stunned, not killed. Weapons were disabled, not destroyed. The galaxy watched through fragmented, incomplete communications that slowly returned to the network as humans allowed some channels to be reopened, and it did not understand. Wars were not fought like this. Victors did not behave like this. Where was the fire? Where was the destruction? Where was the vengeance? Admiral Vasquez answered that question in a broadcast that reached every corner of the Dominion. Another message, transmitted on all frequencies, in all languages, from every relay station the humans had chosen to reactivate. Peoples of the former Dominion, she said. Her voice was level and clear, without anger, without triumph. 3,000 years ago, your governments decided my species must die. They made that decision behind closed doors, without debate, without appeal. 7 billion people were executed for the crime of being different, of growing too fast, of being too human. We could have done the same to you. We have the power, we have the weapons, and we have 3,000 years of grief and rage that would justify, in the eyes of many, a response equal to what was done to us. But we will not. We are not what you tried to make us. We did not survive 3,000 years in the darkness to become the same monsters who sent us there. We survived to prove that there is a better way. She paused. The galaxy listened. We do not want your worlds. We do not want your tribute. We do not want your subjugation. What we want is justice. What we want is acknowledgement. What we want is a guarantee that what was done to Earth will never be done to any species again. The terms were transmitted along with the message. 3 demands. First, the Jakari Dominion must be dissolved, permanently. The treaty structure, the hierarchy, the entire system that allowed 12 species to decide the fate of others. It all had to end. Each species must govern itself. No species shall have dominion over another. Second, every species that participated in or condoned the genocide of Earth must publicly and officially acknowledge the crime. Not in private, not in sealed documents, but in an open broadcast before the entire galactic community. They must say what they did and say that it was wrong. Third, a monument must be built in orbit around Earth. The dead, glass Earth that still hung in the solar system, burned and scarred, lifeless, bearing the name of every human lost in the genocide. 7 billion names etched in light, visible from every world in the former Dominion. These were the demands, and for the most part, the galaxy complied. The Morvadi were the first. Their ambassador, a seated insectoid species named Krill, the same one who had initially dismissed the human transmission as a ruse, stepped before the galactic audience and spoke for 40 minutes about what his species had done. He made no excuses. He downplayed nothing. He described the vote, the reasoning, the casual ease with which 12 species had decided to kill 7 billion people. We told ourselves it was necessary, he said. His compound eyes glistened with something that looked remarkably like shame. We told ourselves they were dangerous, that they would threaten our way of life. But the truth is simpler and uglier than that. We were afraid, and because we were afraid, we killed them all of them. He paused and looked directly into the broadcast camera. To the humans who survived, who endured, who somehow found the strength to return, I am sorry. My species is sorry. And I know that sorry is not enough. It will never be enough, but it is all I have. One by one, most of the elder species followed suit. Some showed genuine remorse. Others clearly went through the motions, speaking the words because they had no choice. Vasquez accepted them all. Sincerity could not be forced, but a public record could be established. Future generations would know what had happened, and they would know that the perpetrators had been held accountable. But one species refused. The Valaxi hegemony, a warlike insectoid species that had originally proposed humanity's extermination to the Dominion Council 3,000 years ago, rejected all terms. Supreme Commander Draxtel TL, leader of the Valaxi war government, broadcast his own message in response to Vasquez's demands. The Valaxi apologized to no one, he said. His mandibles clicked with contempt. The extermination of humans was correct. It was necessary. The only mistake we made was not finishing the job. We will not bow to a species of parasites that should have remained dead. He gathered a fleet. It took him weeks. The communication blackout had scattered his forces, but eventually he managed to assemble every combat-capable ship remaining. 15 vessels, crewed by soldiers who, unlike the other elder species, were actually trained for real combat. The Valaxi were warriors. They had always been warriors. They were the teeth of the Dominion, the species that did the dirty work others considered too crude. It was they who had actually deployed the weapons that destroyed Earth. They gathered at Ra Prime, the former Dominion capital, now vacant of government, and formed a battle order that stretched half the solar system. 15 warships, each armed and ready, each crewed by soldiers who would sooner die than surrender. Draxtel stood on the bridge of his flagship, the pride of the hegemony, and waited for the humans to come. He did not wait long. The tyrannical fleet arrived via slipstream, not the entire fleet. Vasquez had opted for a task force of 500 ships, more than enough. They materialized at the edge of the system and formed a loose, almost casual formation. To Valaxi eyes, it looked like contempt. 500 against 15. The humans were either insane or incredibly confident. They were confident. Supreme Commander Draxtel transmitted to Vasquez, "You have rejected the terms of peace. You have assembled a fleet. I give you one last opportunity to withdraw. Disband your fleet. Accept the terms. Acknowledge the genocide. Let there be no more death." Draxtel's response was to open fire. The 15 Valaxi ships simultaneously unleashed their weapons. A wall of plasma, missiles, and particle beams that turned the space between the two fleets into a storm of light and energy. The barrage hit the shields of the human fleet and did nothing. Absolutely nothing. The shields did not flicker. They did not strain. They absorbed the combined firepower of 15 warships as nonchalantly as a mountain absorbs rain. Vasquez watched the barrage hit and dissipate. She felt a detached sadness. She did not want this fight. She had never wanted a fight, but some lessons could only be taught one way. "Deploy the Prometheus Array," she said. The Prometheus Array was not a fleet-destroying weapon. It was not designed for that. It was designed for something far more terrifying. 5 human ships, specialized vessels that had been hidden at the center of the task force, took up a pentagonal formation and began to glow. The light was faint at first, barely visible, but it grew. It spread between the ships like a web of light, forming a structure that pulsed with a rhythm that felt alive. And then, the sun changed. The star at the center of the Ra system, a stable yellow dwarf that had burned steadily for 8 billion years, flickered. It dimmed for 4 seconds. It lost approximately 10% of its luminosity. The effect was visible to the naked eye from all the planets in the system. The sky darkened, temperatures dropped, sensors went offline. 4 seconds. That was all. Then the star returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. In those 4 seconds, every being in the Ares system understood what the humans were telling them. The resonance cannon could destabilize a star. The humans had just demonstrated that they could, if they wished, shut down the Valaxi sun. They could freeze their worlds, where they could destroy their entire civilization with a single sustained pulse. And they had chosen not to. They had dimmed the sun for 4 seconds, just enough to deliver a message, not a threat. A demonstration, a reminder. We can do to you what you did to us. We choose not to. On the bridge of the pride of the hegemony, Supreme Commander Draxtel stared at the view screen. The sky had darkened. His sun, the sun his species had orbited for its entire evolutionary history, had faltered. His mandibles stopped clicking. His officers were silent. The bridge was quiet, save for the low hum of the ship's systems and the distant sound of an alarm from the engineering section. The solar radiation fluctuation had temporarily knocked out the power grid. Draxtel stood there for a long time. He was a warrior. He had been born for combat and raised with the belief that combat was the highest expression of a species' worth. He had never backed down from anything in his life. But this wasn't combat. It was never going to be combat. Combat required 2 sides with at least a possibility of victory. What the humans had just demonstrated was that the Valaxi had no possibility, not even a small one, no possibility at all. They could fire all their weapons, and the human shields would shrug them off, and in return, the humans could turn off their sun. The order to surrender was the hardest Draxtel had ever given. He transmitted it on an open channel, so his entire fleet could hear it, so the humans could hear it, or so the galaxy could hear it. His voice cracked as he spoke, and he made no attempt to hide it. All Valaxi ships, cease fire, power down weapons, lower shields. He paused, and when he spoke again, the words sounded like they were being torn from him. We accept the terms. The Valaxi fleet ceased fire. 15 warships went dark one by one, like dying stars. It took about 20 minutes for all of them to comply. Some captains resisted the order, but their crews ignored them. No one wanted to fight a species that could shut down their sun. On the bridge of the TNS Remembrance, Admiral Vasquez watched the Valaxi fleet cease fire, and she felt no triumph, no satisfaction, no joy. She felt tired. She felt old. She felt the weight of 3,000 years of grief pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. Captain Okor approached her. "Admiral, the Valaxi have surrendered. All ships are powering down. The battle, if it can be called that, is over." Vasquez nodded. "Transmit the following to all species of the former Dominion. Military phase of Operation Reckoning is complete. There will be no further hostilities. The tyrannical vengeance has achieved its objectives. All species that abide by the stated terms will be left in peace. We are not here to rule. We are here to ensure that what happened to Earth will never happen again." She turned away from the view screen and walked to a small table at the back of the bridge, where she kept her personal belongings. Among them was a sealed glass container no larger than her fist, filled with brown dirt. Earth from Earth, the same dirt Yara Sing had scooped from a flower pot in the Prometheus vault 3,000 years ago. It had been passed down from generation to generation of commanders, each holding it during the most critical moments. Vasquez held it now. She held it and thought of the 7 billion names. She thought of the planet that had been blue and green and alive, and was now black and dead and silent. She thought of the mother who told her daughter she was going on an adventure. The adventure was almost over. There was one more thing to do. One more place to go. The only place that had ever truly mattered. Home. The solar system was quiet. It had been quiet for 3,000 years. Ships did not come here. No probe scanned it. No one in the galaxy had any reason to visit a dead star system containing only a handful of barren rocks and the scorched remains of a planet no one remembered. And the Dominion hadn't even bothered to leave a warning beacon. Earth wasn't important enough to warrant warning anyone. It was simply forgotten, like a grave without a headstone. Fleet Admiral Kyle Vasquez brought the TNS Remembrance through slipstream to the outer reaches of the system. And the first thing she saw on the view screen was Jupiter. It hung in the darkness, immense, and banded, and immutable. Its great red spot still swirled after all these millennia. Jupiter didn't care what had happened to the tiny blue world closer to the sun. Jupiter just kept going, as it always had. The fleet followed. 200 ships emerged from slipstream behind the flagship, forming a silent procession. This was not a battle formation. Weapons were not charged, shields were not raised, tactical warnings were not sounded. This was a pilgrimage. Vasquez stood on the bridge and said nothing as the fleet moved into the system. They passed Saturn. Its rings still glittered with ice. They passed Mars, which humanity had begun to terraform before the genocide. The early terraforming equipment was still there, scattered across the red surface like discarded toys, frozen by vacuum and cold. Vasquez looked at Mars and thought of what it might have become. Then they reached Earth. The bridge crew fell silent. Even Ember, the ancient AI who had guided humanity through 3,000 years of exile, said nothing. There was nothing to say. Earth was dead. The oceans were gone, completely gone. 3,000 years ago, the Dominion bombardment had vaporized them, and what hadn't vaporized had evaporated over the subsequent centuries as the planet's atmosphere thinned and bled into space. Where the Pacific Ocean had once stretched from horizon to horizon, there was now a vast gray plain of dry salt and cracked stone. The continents were fused. Kinetic impacts and antimatter explosions had melted the surface in dozens of places, and the molten rock had flowed and cooled into immense plains of black glass. From orbit, these glass plains caught the sunlight and reflected it back in dull, flat sheets, like mirrors laid upon a grave. The atmosphere was thin and toxic. Carbon dioxide, sulfur compounds, trace elements from the bombardment. Not enough to breathe, not enough to sustain life, just enough to carry the wind. A thin, whistling wind that blew across the dead surface and moved nothing, because there was nothing left to move. No trees, no grass, no animals, no birds, no insects, no bacteria. Nothing living, Nothing at all. The most complete sterilization of a living world ever recorded. The Dominion had done its job well. On the bridge, Vasquez stood by the view screen and looked down at the grave of her species. And for the first time in her long career, she had nothing to command. She had planned every aspect of Operation Reckoning, every battle, every infiltration, every diplomatic maneuver with meticulous precision. But she had not planned this moment. She had not planned what she would feel when she finally saw Earth. What she felt was grief. Not sharp, burning grief of fresh loss, but something deeper, something ancient, a grief passed down through 100 generations, carried in stories and ceremonies and pinches of brown soil, refined and distilled over 3,000 years until it had become as pure and heavy as lead. The grief of humans who had never seen their home, but had never stopped mourning it. Vasquez placed her hand on the glass of the view screen, as if she could touch the dead world below. Her fingers left smudges on the cold surface. "We are here," she said softly. She was not speaking to her crew, she was speaking to the 7 billion who had died. "We are back, as promised." Behind her, Captain Akapor wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Around the bridge, officers stood at their posts and wept without shame. On every ship of the fleet, the same scene was unfolding. Humans, for the first time in 3,000 years, looking at Earth and feeling the full weight of what had been taken from them. For an hour, the fleet orbited in silence. No one spoke, no one needed to. The silence was enough. It was the only fitting response to such a profound wound. Then Ember spoke. The AI's voice came from the speakers, soft, gentle, with a warmth that 3,000 years had not diminished. Ember had been created to save humanity, and he had done so. He had guided them through the darkness, managed their colonies, coordinated their fleets, and kept the memory of Earth alive. When the last living human who had ever walked the surface of Earth had died 29 centuries ago, Ember was, in the most literal sense, the oldest human. Not born of flesh and blood, but born of human minds and human hopes. And he carried the grief of Earth in his circuits just as humans carried it in their hearts. "Admiral," Ember said, "I have spent the last few hours running models of Earth's current state. Atmospheric composition, geological stability, radiation levels, soil chemistry, groundwater analysis. I have compared these readings to the planet's pre-destruction baseline data stored in my archives." Vasquez turned away from the view screen. "The damage is severe, the most severe I have ever calculated for any planetary body. The surface has been effectively sterilized to a depth of approximately 40 meters. The oceans are gone. The atmosphere is unbreathable. However, the magnetic field remains intact. The core is still active. The planet is still geologically alive. Admiral, even if it is biologically dead." Ember paused. In 3,000 years, Vasquez had never heard him pause for dramatic effect. He didn't do that. He wasn't programmed to, which meant this pause was something else, something real. "Admiral, Earth can be healed. It will take time. My models suggest approximately 200 years for a full recovery of a breathable atmosphere, a functional water cycle, and a basic ecosystem. The genetic samples we preserved, every species of plant, every animal, every microorganism that was stored aboard the seed ships, are sufficient to rebuild the biosphere from scratch. It will not be the same Earth. It cannot be. Too much has been lost. But it can be a living world again." Vasquez closed her eyes. She stood in the center of the bridge with her eyes closed and her hands at her sides, and she breathed. For 3,000 years, every living human had carried the knowledge that Earth was dead. It was the central fact of their existence, a wound that never healed, an absence that defined them. And now this ancient machine, this faithful keeper who had carried them through the darkness, was telling her that the wound could be closed. Not erased, never erased, but closed. "Begin reclamation," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word, and she didn't care. The reclamation of Earth became the largest engineering project in human history. Vasquez established a permanent orbital station, the Reclamation Command Post, and dedicated a fleet of 300 ships to the project. Engineers, biologists, atmospheric scientists, geologists, terraforming specialists from every colonial world. The Vengeance volunteered. There were more volunteers than vacancies. Humans fought for the privilege of helping to heal a homeworld they had never seen. The work began at the most basic level, the atmosphere. Giant orbital processors, machines the size of small moons, were placed in orbit around Earth, drawing in the thin, toxic air, stripping out poisons, and returning nitrogen and oxygen. It was slow, agonizing work. A planet's atmosphere is not something to be rushed. It must be built layer by layer, molecule by molecule, balanced and rebalanced 1,000 times. As the atmosphere was restored, surface crews began to prepare the soil. The black glass that covered much of the planet was shattered with focused sonic emitters and mixed with organic compounds synthesized from the genetic material. In the archives of the seed ships, bacteria, protozoa, the earliest forms of Earth life, were introduced first. Hardy microorganisms designed to break down rock, fix nitrogen, and begin the slow process of turning dead rock into living soil. It would take a decade before the first plant could grow, a decade before the first animal could survive, but it had begun. For the first time in 3,000 years, something lived on Earth. As reclamation proceeded, Vasquez turned her attention to the political future of the galaxy. The Dominion was gone, dissolved as its terms demanded. The 12 elder species were now independent. Each governed itself, each struggling with the upheaval of a galactic order that had been overturned in a matter of months. Some, like the Morvati, embraced the change. Freed from the rigid hierarchy of the Dominion, they began to reform their societies, opening diplomatic channels with species they had never been allowed to contact before. Exploring ideas the Dominion had suppressed for millennia, they reached out to humanity with genuine goodwill, and humanity reciprocated. Others struggled. The Jakari, who had been at the top of the Dominion hierarchy for 50 years, found themselves lost without the structure that had defined their civilization. Their economies collapsed, their governments fragmented. Some Jakari blamed humans, others blamed their ancestors for the genocide that had brought them this reckoning, whose civil debates raged across their worlds. The Valaxi retreated into isolation. Draxtel stepped down from his post and vanished into private life on a remote colony. His people, warriors without a war, turned inward and began the slow, painful process of building an identity not based on violence. It would take them a century, but they had begun. And then there were the younger species, dozens of civilizations that had lived under the Dominion's boot, too weak or too new to have any say in galactic affairs. For these species, the fall of the Dominion was not a catastrophe. It was a liberation, and they looked upon humanity, this impossible, stubborn, terrifying species that had been killed and returned from the dead, with something very close to awe. Vasquez understood the danger of that awe. She had seen what happened when one species held too much power over others. She had studied the history of the Dominion and knew that the path from protector to tyrant was short and well-traveled. So the tyrannical vengeance did something no galactic power had ever done. It relinquished its power, not all of it. Humanity retained its fleet, its technology, its colonies. It was not naive, but it restructured its government from the tyrannical vengeance to the tyrannical concord. And the foundational charter of the Concord contained a principle that had never existed in galactic law before, the doctrine of sovereign species. The doctrine was simple. Every species, regardless of its size, technology, or age, had an absolute right to exist. No species could be targeted for extinction. No species could be denied the right to grow and develop. No coalition of species, however powerful, could vote to destroy another. And any species that attempted to do so would face the unified response of all other civilizations in the galaxy. It was a law that should have existed 3,000 years ago, a law that would have saved Earth. And now, humanity, the species that had suffered most from its absence, was the one writing it into existence. Not everyone accepted the Concord immediately. Shattered trust took generations to rebuild. Some species viewed human restraint as a trick, a temporary kindness that would eventually reveal a hidden blade. Others accepted it grudgingly, watching and waiting for the humans to show their true colors. But as the years passed, and humans did not conquer, did not exploit, did not dominate, but instead poured their resources into healing their dead world rather than building an empire, the skeptics slowly fell silent. Humanity was doing what the galaxy had never seen. It was consciously and consistently choosing to be better than the civilization that had tried to destroy it. The Monument of Ashes was completed 12 years after the war. It was built in orbit around Earth, a ring of polished black stone, 10 kilometers in diameter, slowly rotating against the backdrop of the stars. On its inner surface, etched in light that would never fade, were 7 billion names, every human being who had died when Earth was destroyed. The names, recovered from Ember's archives, from census data, from medical records, from school enrollment lists, preserved digitally aboard the seed ships, 7 billion names. It took 4 days to pass all of them in a ship moving at orbital velocity. From the surface of Earth, even from the dead glass surface, the monument was visible at night, a thin, bright line drawn across the sky like a scar made of stars. Vasquez was present for the dedication ceremony. She was old now, even by improved human standards, over 130 years old, with silver in her hair and lines around her eyes that hadn't been there when she stood on the bridge of the Remembrance and demanded the Dominion's surrender. She had retired from military command years ago. The fleet didn't need a military admiral in peacetime, and she didn't want to be a politician. She wanted only one thing: to see Earth alive again. She would not live to see full recovery. She knew the 2-century timeline Ember had projected meant the work would be completed long after her death. But she saw the beginning. She saw the first bacteria take hold in the newly broken soil. She saw the first thin wisps of cloud form in the slowly thickening atmosphere. She saw the first rain, a light gray mist that fell on the plain of black glass in what had once been Central Europe. The first rain on Earth in 3,000 years. She stood in that rain and let it fall on her face, and she didn't bother to wipe away the tears that mingled with it. It was enough. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. 214 years after reclamation began, Earth was alive again. The oceans had returned. Not as deep as the originals, not yet, but growing. The Pacific was a vast, shallow sea teeming with algae and simple marine life that would evolve into something richer over the centuries. The Atlantic was deeper, fed by rivers that now flowed across the continents, the slowly greening continents. Forests grew where glass plains had once been. Not the same forests. The species were different, taken from the genetic archives and adapted to the new conditions. But forests nonetheless. Trees reaching for a sky that was blue again. Grass covering the scars of bombardment craters. Flowers blooming in colors no human eye had seen on Earth for over 3 millennia. Animals walked the land, birds flew the air, fish swam in the rivers, insects buzzed in the meadows. The biosphere was young and simple, lacking the complexity the old Earth had possessed, but it was alive, and it was growing. It was becoming richer with every passing year. Humans were coming home. They came from all the colonial worlds, from families who had lived on harsh worlds on the outer rim for generations, who had known nothing but iron dust, thin atmospheres, and the constant hum of life support systems. They stepped out of their transport ships onto green grass under a blue sky with a real wind on their faces, and many of them fell to their knees and wept because they had heard about it all their lives. But they had never believed they would see it. Children were born on Earth for the first time in 3,000 years. They grew up under the open sky, drank water that fell from clouds, ate food that grew from the soil. They learned about the genocide in school, and they visited the Monument of Ashes on field trips, and they spoke the names of the dead, and they understood, as children understand important things, deeply and simply, that the world they lived on was a gift, earned by unimaginable sacrifice. In the Sahara, which was now green, a vast pasture dotted with young trees and bisected by a river that had not existed 3,000 years ago, an old woman stood alone in the meadow. Her name was Sarah Vasquez. She was the great-granddaughter of Kyle Vasquez, and she was the last living human who had known the Admiral personally. She was 287 years old. She was silver-haired now, but her eyes were clear. And she had traveled from New Dawn, the first colonial planet where she had been born, to Earth, because she had made a promise to a dying woman long ago. Kyle Vasquez had died at the age of 141 inches, a small house on the Reclamation Command post station, overlooking Earth out the window. By then, the planet below had the first hints of green, patches of moss or lichen on the shattered glass, the earliest signs of life that would eventually cover the world. She had looked at those green patches every day, and she had smiled. And on the day of her death, she had asked her great-granddaughter to do one thing. "When the grass grows," she had said, "stand in it for me." Sarah stood in the grass. It reached her waist now, tall, green, waving in the warm wind. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold she had seen in pictures, but never in person. Above her, the Monument of Ashes caught the last rays of the day and glowed. A ring of 7 billion names, written in fire against the darkening sky. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, sealed container. Inside was a handful of brown dirt. the same dirt, or descendants of the same dirt, that Yara Sing had scooped from a flower pot in the Prometheus vault. On the last day of the old Earth, it had been passed from hand to hand for 3,000 years, carried across the galaxy and back, held during ceremonies and battles, births and deaths. The most precious substance humanity possessed. Sarah opened the container. She poured the dirt into her palm. She looked at it, just dirt, brown and ordinary, no different from the soil beneath her feet. But it was from the past. It was from a world that had been, and now she stood on a world that is. She knelt and pressed the dirt into the ground. She pressed it with her fingers, mixing the old with the new, letting the 3,000 years of memory settle into the earth. The dirt of the old earth joined the dirt of the new earth, and they became one. She stood up. She brushed her hands on her clothes. She looked up at the sky, where, next to the thin, bright line of the monument, the first stars were appearing. And she spoke the words that all humans knew. Words that had been spoken every year for 3,000 years. Words that Captain Yara Sing had recorded in protocol remembrance. On the first night of humanity's exile, we were, we are, we will be. The wind carried her voice across the meadow, over the river, through the young forests, across the healing mountains, into the slowly filling oceans. It carried it to the ears of children playing on the banks of the New Sahara River, and to the engineers still working on orbital stations, and to the ships passing through the solar system on their way to new destinations in a galaxy that was slowly, imperfectly learning to be better than it had been. And somewhere in the quiet databanks of a very old intellect that had been awake and watching for 30 centuries, that had guided humanity from ash destruction to green fields of rebirth, that had never once forgotten its purpose, somewhere in the ancient core of Ember, a simple record was updated. The file read, Species 4217 H. sapiens. The old status, eradicated, was deleted. The new status read, returned. And below it, on a line Ember had added himself, without asking anyone, was a single word that no one should have been able to feel, but that this one felt anyway, bittersweet.